And we want to make sure that we do not.
I think we lost our teacher. We lost our teacher for. Okay, he's come back in. Como
All
ve
right.
que.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Maybe I touched something that just threw things into a spiral. Okay. So, as I was saying,
Your video.
uh, pardon?
Your video is also off.
Okay. Give me 1 second. All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, we looked at the trial that was taking place, and simultaneously, while Jesus was being tried, Peter was warm in the fire. You remember me saying he was warm in the fire, but at the same time, he came under fire because those who had seen him had locked his facial features in their memory. And who knows, maybe his body language also played a role in them identifying him. And having been identified by a relative of Malchus, then he reached to the place where he was now out of it. You recall I mentioned that even though St. John did not tell us this, but over in St. Matthew and I think Luke also told us that Peter went on really bad. In order not to be identified or not to be counted, he went on bad. The Bible said that he was cursing. I do not know the type of language and the expression, but it was recorded. It helps us to understand that all of this was really playing out because Jesus had already spoken. He had already told Peter that this was going to happen. And we must understand, therefore, that when Jesus speaks, when he says something, it is going to happen. It doesn't matter what it sounds like. It's important that we accept it as truth. Sometimes we try to uh, uh, accompany what is being said with what we already know. But sometimes we are left with questions, even though it doesn't sound possible. But if Jesus said it, it is so. If Jesus said it, it is so. And we're going to prove that as we go through. So uh, we have reached a very interesting part of the trial of Jesus. Peter had just denied him. And as soon as Peter did that, when I was reading the information, it is said that Jesus looked across. It is then telling me that where Peter was and where Jesus was, they were in a vicinity where it was clear view. So when Peter denied Jesus for the third time and the cock crew, they made eye contact. It is to say, whether it was the spirit of unity and connection, or it was the cock that crew, which was an alarm notifying that something had just happened, or it is crunch time. What am I saying? I am saying that there was an immediate revelation, and Peter was so upset with himself. He was so mad with what he did because he had told Jesus, I'm not going to do this. Far be it from you. You know me better than this, as it would be. I love you too much to do this. But Jesus was helping Peter to understand that you cannot depend on yourself, your humanity. Your best efforts are not good enough, but you're going to need the Spirit of Almighty God. And so we therefore look at the trial that Jesus was going through, where there were 3 trials at first, or 3 phases, let me put it that way, during the trial with the Jewish authorities. And after that, there were 3 more with the Gentile authorities. How is that so? We look and we see where Peter was, Jesus was tied up and brought to Annas. That's trial number 1. After Annas, he was then sent to Caiaphas. That's number 2. After Caiaphas, he was then sent to the Sanhedrin, where Caiaphas was also present. So there were 3 trials in that period of time. Now, leading up to his execution, we must understand that everything must sync with the scriptures. And so there are 3 phases of his Jewish trial. We also will find out that there are also 3 phases of the trials by the Gentile authorities. And who are those people? Those people are basically 2. It would be Pilate, then Herod, and then back to Pilate. And so we find then that all that will take place will eventually fulfill the scriptures. So he was tried before Annas, the high priest. Then he was sent to Caiaphas, which is the second. Then he was now moved to the Sanhedrin, and Caiaphas was present. Now, the Sanhedrin is basically the supreme court, if you will, of the Jewish authorities. It must be noted that the 3 trials with the Jewish authorities, they were all illegal. I'll say that again. All that transpired when he was among the Jewish authorities, they were illegal. And I will bring that up a little later on. Now, they did this. It was in such a hurry, because if you recall, when they bound Jesus, it was dark, it was night. They were having torches and lanterns and all the different weapons that they had carried. And this was all taking place in the night. Now, right after they arrested Jesus and took him to Annas, and then to Caiaphas, and then to the Sanhedrin, all of this was in the dead of night. And during this time, they had reached a verdict. Of course, this was a mock trial. It was a sham. It was not legitimate. His sentencing had, as it has been cooked up, and they had broken all the laws possible in order to present Jesus as a convicted person. In order for them to put him to death, they had to have a trial. So whether it was legitimate or not, they had to hurry through the process. Now, one thing we must remember is that everything that is done within their circle on the timeline specified were done in watches. So you have one watch, which is from 6 to 9 p.m. Another watch is from 9 to midnight. That is a second watch. Third watch is from midnight to 3 a.m. And then the fourth watch is from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Now, before they could close out the sentencing, they had to bear in mind the limited time that they had. And so what they did, and I was very careful to read all the information that sometimes we don't see it word for word in the scriptures, but historical facts will help us to understand. And I found out that what they did, they hurriedly tried Jesus through their mock trial and sentenced him before the third watch was over. In other words, by 3 a.m., Jesus was sentenced already, even though the trial had not yet been held legitimately. It is to say then that his amendment rights, or the Third Amendment right, had been violated. He was not given a fair trial, because with a fair trial, there would have to be an accusation at first and all the different legs that would follow. So here they were recognizing that they had a limited time. Now the following day was crucial. And in order for them to carry out this, they have to be speeding up what they had to do. So let's go through. And so with their corrupt intent, then they came to the place where they would be first in line. And may I point out that because their part of the trial is over, they are now heading to the Gentile authorities. Who are those people? That would be Pilate and Herod. However, I also learned that in the courts, it would be always a packed court where a lot of cases were being handled. But one thing was noticed here. After they tried Jesus in their mock trial, we would suppose, did not go to sleep. But what they did, they were ready to be the first ones to be heard the following morning when it was time for the court sessions to be open. Matthew tells us that it was early in the morning, and they did that because they were trying to beat the clock. However, what we find that happened when they got there, and I'm sure they knew that this would be a blockage. However, they were prepared that whatever it took, they would make sure that Jesus gets tried that very morning. And so in the opening passage, we were told that they went to Pilate. And when they got there, they stopped at a particular point. And this was an interesting interjection, because while they were making all these ridiculous plots and plans, they were getting ready to eat the Passover. And so before they got there, they had broken so many of their own laws, but it did not really matter to them. Why was that so? Because they had to fulfill the scriptures. The mock trial that they had in itself was illegal. And so with their corrupt intent, the time was important that they came together and have this established in the morning. And so let's now take a look at some of the laws that were broken, their own laws. The Jewish laws tells us, and I'll just pull that up so I'll make them available. Okay. Jewish law provides for what is known as a preliminary examination. And this is done before a magistrate. It had to be done before the magistrate first and not by a priest. Now, if you go back in the scripture that we read, it tells you that Jesus was brought to the high priest. Now that is their first law that is broken. And John tells us about that in chapter 13, or rather chapter 18, verses 13 to 23. The second law was the trial was held at the high priest's palace. What's wrong about that? No trial was ever held at the residence of the high priest. All meetings of the Sanhedrin were held in the hall adjoining the temple. In other words, whenever you have a trial behind closed doors, there has to be suspicion. People are not going to be convinced that this was legitimate, but they were prepared for all that would be said against what they did because they had to find Jesus guilty. And so the trial there at his residence was outside of what the Jewish law would say. Blasphemy is not a capital offense, and a capital offense that would warrant the death penalty. In other words, when they could not find enough to accuse Jesus, they threw in blasphemy. In other words, he has presented himself as one who is God, equal to God. He is God himself. And so it was not punishable by death. Now, the Jewish court do not question prisoners. That's number 4. In other words, the prisoner has the right to remain silent until they have read all the accusation. Then there would be now a Jewish person who would stand in defense of that person who is being accused. And so the Jewish law also prohibited the opening of a trial at night. This is such a big blunder. A trial could not be opened at night, and so they opened that trial in the dead of night, and they closed that phase in the night. It means they were bent on breaking their own laws. It was forbidden by the law. That did not stop them. They did not regard what their own law had said. On many occasions, before I go further, they would approach Jesus and they would ask him questions. Why don't your disciples wash their hands when they eat? It is not about them washing their hands. That was one of their oral laws. They wanted to find Jesus guilty of committing an offense. And so what they did, they would always establish laws that would make it harder for anyone to do what they would want to do or to live in a normal way. They now know that the need to legitimize their miscarriage of justice was speedy. They knew that they had to rush this through. And so the next one says, no capital offense of trials were allowed the day before Passover. I'll say that again. No capital offense trials were allowed the day before Passover. In other words, they wanted to make sure that everything was right on the dot. However, they went over into the day before the Passover, and that is where they broke their own law. No defender was assigned to Jesus. In other words, Jesus was there all by himself. He was the one that was being questioned. He did not have anyone to defend himself. If none of the judges defended the victim, rather the accused, then this trial would have been ultimately a guilty trial. A guilty trial would then show you that he did not get to defend himself. And so the verdict of guilty was invalid, and the sentence of death could not be executed. Jesus did not have anyone to represent him except for the questions that he chose to address. And let me not say answer, but he addressed them. Had Jesus been tried and convicted, he would be stoned and not crucified. Follow me carefully. Had he been tried the legal way and been convicted by their law, he would not be crucified, but he would be stoned. Now, we have some bothers here. We have some trouble. We have some things to work out, some legal jangles to untangle. Why is this so? If Jesus was to be found guilty and not be crucified, what would have happened to all the prophecies that were made? What would have happened to all that Jesus had said? Can I tell you, brothers and sisters, that Jesus would have been a fake? Jesus would have been a deceiver. Jesus would not have been what or whom he said he is. So therefore, as pawns, as players, as different characters acting out the scene in this drama, they had to do what they did. They could not do otherwise. It reminds me that when Moses went to Pharaoh, while God was telling Moses what to say, he was also dealing with Pharaoh. He was hardening Pharaoh's heart. Why? Because had he not hardened Pharaoh's heart, then his power would not have been on display. They would not see the different plagues that would have overtaken Egypt. So now, brothers and sisters, we see that they had to find Jesus guilty, even though their court was a sham, even though it was illegal, but by their own rights, they had to do what they did. And so now we're going to look at the phases of the Gentile authorities. He will first be tried by Pilate, and then second by Herod, and then he'll be brought back to Pilate. And then the final stage we will see. So we come to verse 28, where we read that they, the Jewish leaders, along with the temple police, led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium. That is the room where the Roman judgment hall was occupying. In other words, the praetorium was a place of judgment. It was a place that was strictly operated by Gentiles. Now, because the praetorium was of such, the Jews, even though they were in a hurry to end this trial, but they came upon a little blockage. What was that? They would now want to go in, but they refrained from going in to Pilate. Why? Because it was in the dwelling of a Gentile. It is said that this is where Pilate resided. He resides there at different times, and at other times he would reside in Caesarea. Why two places? Historically, we're told that Herod the Great had built a palace in Caesarea. Now, at this palace in Caesarea, where all the details and all the palatial dwelling details were observed in its construction, that's where he lived. But on special feast days, or during the times when the Jewish feasts take place in Jerusalem, then the governor would leave Caesarea and go all the way up to Jerusalem, and then he would be now camping out in the palace right there in the city. Why would he do this? I was told that he did this because he did not want to risk an uprising or an uproar if anything should happen during the feast day. In other words, he would be easily reached, and he would be able to quell all the violence. He would be able to put an end to all the riots. So we see then he resided here because it was during the special feast, the Passover. Now, while he was there, Jesus was brought to him. And this dramatic scene was acted out. Even though all these characters that we see show up, they were fulfilling their own roles. But this was a miscarriage of justice to the highest degree. All of these men were all in positions where they were guilty. Jesus's character stood out, and it was shining bright, even though they had accused him, but yet he was sinless. Even though he has been sentenced to death, it is his purity, it is his spotlessness, it is his cleansing power, it is his glory. We want to take that even further. It's his majesty that is really shining through. And like we had mentioned even in foregone studies, that Jesus's glory was always coming to the fore. Whatever it is that is taking place, whatever it is that is happening, it doesn't matter. Jesus still shines through. His glory cannot be held back. It doesn't matter what it is that's going on. He's now on trial, but his glory is still shining through. And so he was now brought to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now, the governor was Roman authority. He was the one who represented the emperor. And so after they did bring him, he asked why he was brought. In other words, he asked Jesus. Now, because of the distance that they had kept, Now, they did not go into the praetorium. They had to hold their distance. Why did they do this? Because if they should go into the dwelling of Pilate, they would have defiled themselves according to the law. In other words, they would have come in the residence of a Gentile, and doing that would have rendered them defiled. They would now not be clean enough to take the Passover supper. In other words, they would have committed defilement. It would have been something that they would not be qualified by their own laws. So their ceremonial law would have prevented them. And having this foremost on their mind, they brought Jesus as far as to the entrance. And Jesus was now left to Pilate. Now, one would wonder if this was illegal, wouldn't they have sent a representative who would speak for Jesus? Would they have read out the accusation? Instead, it was Pilate that asked Jesus, "What are you here for? What are your charges?" Now, we all know that is no way to address someone who is being charged. The official thing to do is that the indictment be read, the charges be read, and it must not be read by the accused. It is to say then, with their hurried up plan, they have ignored all the governing rules and the approaches. How could they do this? They can do it, and they have done it because they have a plan. They did allow nations to carry through or to carry out different systems of governing. Please understand that the Roman authority, even though they had conquered Israel, Jerusalem was now under their authority. But they were pretty lenient in many respects. They allowed certain self-governing of the Jewish people. To a certain degree, they had given them enough room to operate. However, they were under strict observation. Israel was now being very careful that they do not get on the wrong side of the law. Now, in order for this death punishment or death penalty to be carried out, and let me back up a little bit, the death penalty was given to Israel when God spoke about the law. And if we read in Genesis chapter 9, it helps us to understand what that is. Israel not being able to execute this death penalty is now pushing it on the Romans. And so it does not give them enough time to do what they want to do. They are unable now to prove Jesus's guilt. And so they are ignoring all the rules. They're pulling out all the stops where they can make sure he's pronounced guilty. We must therefore understand, as I had read earlier, the closest they could have gotten to him being guilty according to how they view it was through blasphemy. Please know that they are all intent on killing Jesus. So then, stoning is ruled out. Stoning would not have rendered the effects. Why? Because stoning was through the Jewish authorities. They are now not in the position to stone Jesus. But because Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto me. Stoning, therefore, would have been off the books. Because like I said before, that whatever Jesus said, it is going to come to pass. All these are players in the scene, in the drama, in the script that will fulfill every single word. They had basically followed Jesus around. They were trying to find everything so that they could throw him off the cliff at one time. They wanted to stone him. They picked up stone, but Jesus got out of their company and he eluded them. And so then stoning did not work because his hour was not yet come. And so the authorities not giving up on getting him, but they gave up on stoning him. They had now their last ditch effort. They had tried to kill him. And they were now desirous of making this happen. And so why is it now? Why is it at this time? Because the net was already cast and God was pulling them in. He was bringing them to a place where they now cannot help themselves. You recall that judgment brings us to the point where if we resist for too long, God has a way of hardening our heart. He has a way of making us so callous that we cannot change. And this is where they have reached. They cannot help themselves. They have gotten to the place where they're now in a spot where they cannot turn. They can do nothing else but carry out God's plan. Now, in my research, I also found some other information. I was referred to a group or a set of writings called the Talmud, Talmud. Now, the Talmud is, it's the Hebrew term for learning or study. But there is a compilation of writings in this literature. It is commonly referred to as a compilation of ancient teachings regarded as sacred narratives. Narratives by the Jews from the time it was compiled until modern times. And still, it is so regarded by traditional religious Jews. And here it is, this compilation of writings and Jewish studies says that, and let me read that, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, and this took place in 70 AD, 40 years before that, judgment in matters of life and death were taken away from Israel. All right? That would mean about 30 AD. So this was said in 70 AD. And that's right at the time when Jesus was to be crucified. This is happening right there and then. It may sound like it's a coincidence, but can I tell you that God has a way of bringing things together? God has a way of moving on people's heart to change even the way of their governing. And so even though Rome was still handling the higher court rulings, they made sure that the Jews were stripped of the right of capital punishment. And so Rome made it very convenient. And the Talmud says that at this very time period, it comes into play where the death of Christ is concerned. In other words, could we say that this is coincidental? I wouldn't say so. I believe that it was God's own doing. God was using government. God was using leaders. God was using authority to change laws, to amend laws, to modify laws, so that his word would come to pass. Let God be true and every man a liar. And so the first Roman governor that was assigned to the land of Israel was named Carpogeneus. And this Jewish historian Josephus tells us that he was appointed in 6 AD. He had the powers of life and death in his hands by Caesar in 30 AD. It seems it was removed from the Jews during that time. The timing could not be more perfect. If Jesus is to die, then he's going to die how he said he would die. I'll say that again. If Jesus was to die, it means that he would die eventually the way he had spoken, the way he had prophesied, the kind of death that he said he would die. If I be lifted up, when you're being stoned, you don't get lifted up. When Stephen was being stoned, he was thrown down. In other words, the Bible said that Saul held the garments of those who stoned Stephen, and he was stoned to death. He was on the ground, but Jesus said, I will be lifted up. Now we know then that no lifting up goes on in the Jewish world. They do not have any hand in crucifixion. They cannot carry out that death penalty. And so what they now do, and when we read all the scriptures, not just here in St. John, we find out that in Matthew and in Luke, it tells us that when Pilate tried to get away from making the decision by saying things that would make it easier for them to forgive Jesus, they tell him that if you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. In other words, it's not going to go good with you. We know what string to pull. We can get you out of this place in a jiffy. We know exactly what to do. So don't you pull it. They were threatening Pilate. We are going to approach Caesar, the emperor, if you do not do what we say. And this they press on. And that is why when Pilate sent him to Herod, Herod sent him back to Pilate. Why? Because it was Pilate's call. Pilate was nervous. Why was he nervous? He was nervous because his wife had a dream. He himself found that Jesus was not guilty. He himself recognized that Jesus had done nothing wrong. He recognized that what was going on was because of hatred. It was because they did not embrace Jesus. I am saying, therefore, whatever Pilate did, it was on his terms. But the Jewish people, they had the say. They were the ones that pushed Pilate. They reached the stage where they said, let his blood be on us. It's not you, Pilate. It's not really you. But let his blood be on us and our children. And so when we read further, I'm going to read a passage from the portion. Then Pilate said to them, you take him. I'm sorry, let me get back to the verse. Then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your law. They were already aware. They already passed their judgment. They knew that what they wanted was already premeditated. And so when they told Pilate that he should pass that guilty verdict, Pilate said to them, according to your law, but not according to the law of Rome. It is to say then, by any means necessary, they wanted Pilate to pronounce that guilty verdict. Therefore, the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. In other words, it is a dirty job. We cannot do it. But they were willing to push him off and to see to it that they hold Pilate's neck or office to the chopping block. If you don't pronounce him guilty, we are going to talk about it. Caesar is going to hear about it. We are not going to stop until you're dethroned. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this? Or did others tell you this concerning me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priest have delivered you to me. What have you done? Now, this is absurd. He should never be asked what he had done. They want him to incriminate himself. In other words, they want him to state his case, present your case. He did not have a case. They had a case against him. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdoms were of this world, my servant would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. That must have breathed or allowed Pilate to breathe a sigh of relief. It must have helped him. His heart rate must have really stabilized when Jesus said those words. Because after having heard all the things about Jesus, even before he met him, he would have already had knowledge of some of the things that could be expected. Now he knows that Jesus is not about fighting for power in this present world. In other words, it was not a threat to his authority. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. He went further. He was interested to find out. He said, are you a king? Because that struck a high note. Because Jesus mentioning that his kingdom is not of this world, it helps us to know that Pilate recognized that he was in the presence of a king. He was in the presence of the King of Kings. He was now interrogating the King of Kings. Now, if let's pull up a scenario here. If you should be driving on the highway, or rather, let's say you are a police officer, and someone is doing something that you deem breaking the law, and you stop them, you pull them over, and you approach the vehicle, and you said, ma'am or sir, you were driving at a high rate of speed, and this is a 30-mile zone or a 50-mile zone, and you were going 75. And that person says, okay, officer, I agree. But we are all civil servants. We are all officers. We serve, we work for the same authorities. And in that person's tone of voice, they would be saying that in a way suggesting that they are maybe a police officer or a detective. And then they would expect that officer to ease them and to back off. Here it is then, when Pilate heard Jesus mentioning that his kingdom is not of this world, he then recognized that he was speaking with someone not at the level that he had seen him presented. He was now convinced that, look, this makes it even worse. He's telling me now that his kingdom is not of this world. He's telling me that if he wanted to be defended, he could summon his troops to defend himself, but that's not what he's about. Is it to say then that what my wife told me is really true? What did his wife say to him? His wife said, see to it that you have nothing to do with this just man. I could not sleep last night. I could not sleep because he was all in my dream. I was being harassed. How is it then that this woman, the wife of Pilate, was restless and was having nightmare? She was tossing in her sleep because God had so organized it that everything will culminate, will come together, making us know that he is sending messages. He's sending signals. He's telling truth here and truth there. He's dropping hints here and hints there, and they are not picking up. Isn't it funny when the word of God goes out, truth is being disseminated because people are bent on doing their own thing, they still miss it? Jesus told him, and I'll read the verse. Let me go back. 37. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world. Stop right there. Now, Jesus is speaking now of his natural birth. He has come into this world to establish a kingdom that is not of this world. But follow me carefully. He is using this opportunity of recruiting subjects that are presently in this world, and so that they can be inheritors of the kingdom that is not of this world. In other words, we are of this world, but he being not of this world, in order for us to be of the world that he's from, he is now going to have to recruit us. And he was in that recruiting mission when he called his disciples. And so they said, are you a king? So he said, for this cause I was born, for this cause came I into this world? He said that I should bear witness of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Now, in other words, Jesus was saying, look, don't listen to the lies. Don't listen to the people that just say things and have no truth in it. He was telling him that whoever is of the truth, they're not going to be believing or accepting the lies. You are going to know the truth. You are going to know when truth meets truth. And here it is. Pilate just blew it. He was at a place now where he could have been converted if he had allowed himself to listen to Jesus some more. But because he was doing what he had made up his mind to do, to stay in office, to continue to please Caesar, to be Rome's representative. In other words, his office that was under threat. He said, by whatever means, I'm going to have to keep my position. So Jesus said, whoever is of the truth will hear me. He very cynically looked at Jesus and asked, what is truth? He asked the question, brothers and sisters, but he did not stay for the answer. It is to say that the answer is already given, and there are people who have no interest in getting the answer. Truth is available, but there are those who choose rather to believe a lie. They do not want the truth, because if they should hear the truth, it is going to bring conviction, and they do not want to turn from their sins. They do not want to give up their life of sin. They love their sinful life. Wow. The Bible says, he who sows to the flesh reaps corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit, he will reap life everlasting. And so we must understand that while they had this back and forth, they had made up their mind. And when John closed out this chapter, the people ended up making their choice, choosing to put Barabbas in a place of freedom, because Jesus could not continue any longer. Why could he not? Because his time had come. He was now going to be crucified. For this cause, I came into the world. And so Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault. I find no fault in this man at all. In other words, I don't know what to do. I have tried all that I could. I do not have any reason to kill him. And here it is, brothers and sisters. The people said, if you do not do this, you are going to hear from us. Have you ever been threatened by someone? Yes, you will be threatened. Somebody will threaten you and say, well, you're going to hear from my lawyer. I'm going to take you to court. Or even, I'm going to call my brother. Here it is. The Jews held that power, that authority over Pilate. And he was now in a position where he was ready to crumble. He was ready to cave in. And because of their constant threat, Here it is now. Therefore, because it was the preparation day, and the bodies, I'm sorry, where did this come from? And so it says, but you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Barabbas was a robber. We must understand that people will be chosen above others when truth needs to be suppressed. When they don't want to hear the truth, they will choose the wrong, and they will reject the right. And because they did not want to see Jesus around anymore, Barabbas, who was a robber, he was one that was like a Robin Hood, put it this way. He was one that would always plunder and go after even those who had wealth. And so he was a hunted man. But now he was waiting to be tried, or might have even been tried before. But now it was time for the release of someone. However, Caiaphas had prophesied earlier that one man should die for the nation. Little did he know that this was going to be so widespread. It was going to be more than just the nation of Israel. One man is going to die, not just for Israel, but for the whole world. And so, yes, he is right. He said, you don't know anything at all. Don't you know that this is going to happen? This must happen. And one would wonder, what flew into his head? How did this get into his brain? Where did he get this thinking from? God has a way of stealing the show, stealing the moment. God has a way of just breaking through and catch some people talking. They're talking, and all of a sudden, something just changed in their argument. Caiaphas just started saying something that, where did this come from? What did I just say? How did that happen? He had to, because Jesus was going to be that sacrificial lamb. Caiaphas's intent was that there be not any destruction in Jerusalem. But it was more far-reaching than that. If Jesus did not die, destruction would be all over the whole world. And so, yes, when they made their choice, when they chose Barabbas over Jesus, they did not realize that Jesus was their best choice. In order for him to be lifted up, in order for him to suffer and die, then you and I would not have been lifted up. We would still be in the gutter. But he, being lifted up first, has a way of drawing men. And so they said, yes, give us Barabbas. Pilate said, his blood be upon, his blood is not going to be on my shoulder. I wash my hand. Now, that was mockery. at the highest degree. Mockery because you cannot wash your hand, literally, and be free from the blood of anyone. I'll say that again. You cannot literally wash your hand and be free from the blood of anyone. If you have caused their death, if you have caused their demise, it's not a literal washing of the hand that is going to free you. It is being so sorry. A confession becomes necessary. A turning is necessary. And so Pilate did, if you'd excuse me, could I tell you that this was mockery to the Jews? He was mocking the Jews, if you ask my opinion. Because they believe so much in literal washing of the hand. Pilate was basically saying, okay, guys, I'm following what you do. You believe so much in washing of the hand to be clean. I'm going to wash my hand out of this. I'm clean. It's on you. They said, no problem, Pilate. Let his blood be on us and our children. We can bear it. My God. My God. What willingness. The mob was ready. So they cursed their children. They cursed their grandchildren. They cursed their whole generation. The Bible tells us, and I'm getting ready to close, that God, when he took Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, he had made certain promises. He said, in blessing, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you so much that all the nations of the world will be blessed. The nations of the earth is going to be blessed through you. And all the many years, thousands of years later, these same people that God had told their ancestor, their father, that he was going to bless them, they were now turning it around and they were accepting a curse. They were willing to take a curse. They were willing to curse their generations to come because they want to get rid of Jesus. I'm saying tonight, brothers and sisters, when we look at this whole case, Jesus had to go the way he went. And having gone the way he went, that's the only way you could be delivered. That's the only way that I could be delivered. When they were stoning Stephen, they did it with such pride. They did it with anger, with indignation. Why? Because Stephen had told them truth. They do not want to hear truth. And I have a word of warning for all of us. Let us make sure that when truth is being told, we don't get aggravated or angry or upset and agitated. Make sure that when truth is being taught or truth is being preached or truth is being said, we don't get angry. We do not get upset. Truth cannot be subsidized. It cannot be compromised. And so if truth be told, we will be saved. If we cannot hear truth, we will not be saved. Let his blood be on us and our children. But I'm so glad that even though they were willing to take a curse, the blood of Jesus is able to remove it. Even though their ancestors being so angry, wanting to put Jesus to death, they accepted a curse and said, let it be on us. We can fix that. We can deal with that. But Jesus is still merciful. And he's still willing to remove curses, even though it was done because they wanted to get rid of him. But I'm so glad, the writer said, he was willing to drink the bitter cup. I'm so glad he didn't call the angels. I'm so glad that his battalion did not get summoned, because you and I would have been lost. Had it not been for the place called Mount Calvary, had it not been for the